Welcome back. So I promised that I would explain what this draw thing was. So I'm going to do that now. This draw thing is what we call a method or a function. Now, some languages we use them interchangeably, and that's entirely fine. What we want to understand today is that a method is sort of a structured way of doing things. So think about it. You have a routine when you get up in the morning. If we were to write that out as code, that you would find that that itself is a function or a method. There are things that you do when you go to work. There are things that, there are always these different types of inbuilt subroutines that we have. And programming is no such exception. Instead of having to write out the instructions every single time, it's really good if we can package it in a way and then we can use it in lots of other different places. So this is an example of that in this draw thing that I'm doing here. And when we create a function, what we have to do is we usually have to define it or create a space in the computer to say this is our subroutine. So some languages will have a def command, some will have a function command, whatever depends on your language, and I'm not going to go into that now. But basically, you then have to give it a name. So we called ours draw, and then we have some brackets, and we'll come to the brackets in a second. But right now, what I want to do then is I want to say inside here, this is what I call the body of my function. It's going to be all the stuff that I do inside. Now, all functions have an option of whether or not you want to return something for that. So for example, you might have a subroutine in your daily work which says, I want to get coffee. So you go to your local coffee shop and you come back or you return with coffee. So that might be fine. Other times you might just go, I want to go for a walk. There's nothing to return from the walk. You're just taking an action and then that's it. So if you want to return something, you usually have to put a return keyword to say that you're bringing back something from the function. Now, inside the body of the function or body of the method, you can do pretty much whatever you want. You can create variables, you can have conditionals, you can do all the things that we've been talking about so far. The important thing to remember, inside this space, it's like its own pocket dimension. So what happens in there, everything else around it doesn't have access to it, can't see it, sort of nicely, wrapped up. It's a little bit, don't look at me. Which is why return, if you want something to come back, you have to make sure that you return it, otherwise it won't happen. This bit here is important as well, because inside there might be sometimes, let's go back to the coffee shop, where you actually need to bring in things for it to work. So unless you're in a special coffee shop, you're gonna need some money. So you might need to put something in that subroutine so you can have it with you when you want to use it. So let's go back to this marker example and see how it might work. So my function, actually I'm just going to leave that there, and I'm going to say, let's say draw a line. I don't know what draw a line is, but we can look at that a little bit later. So let's say draw a line, and okay, and we're just going to do that. And we might, that's it. That's all we're going to do. So now when I come back up here, if we look back up here, that marker is then going to perform that action when I call the method draw. Now there are a couple of things to talk about. Is you'll notice that I'm using a dot, what we call a dot notation, and that means that this marker has a method inside itself. It knows how to do this draw thing. It's sort of like how to wave, okay, for the most part, or you know how to greet someone. You know that built in. So if I say, hey, greet someone, you know what to do. It's just the same way with a marker somehow knows how to draw. Okay. Other times you might write it a different way, which is draw and a list of markers. And this is interesting because what I'm saying here is this method requires a marker. Okay, so I need to pass in a marker. And when we do that, this now becomes an argument or a parameter to do that. So hopefully this is not too traumatic, But if you remember back in your school days and you were doing mathematics and you had things called functions, and you'd have, f of x is equal to, 2x plus 3, x is sort of the parameter. And basically you put in the thing, you put in the value for x, and then you get back whatever. It's exactly the same thing here, where you need to put in the marker, and then the marker does the thing in the function. This is really, really powerful and is a key component to programming. And we use it. You will see this all the time. In fact, there are hardly any programs that exist without functions and methods. So it's a really important thing. And what I would say now is see if you can find a way to think about your next coffee run. Think about how you'd create a function for that. Or even things about like getting your keys and opening the door. How would you create that as a subroutine? And the more you get used to that, is the better the idea of this concept will become clearer for you. We talked a little bit about functions and what they can return, but what happens when things go wrong? And how do we make sure that our program doesn't just stop? Find out next time.